Okay, get this. Imagine getting divorced, and then you just move right back in with your ex. Not for a week, not for a month, but for 14 years. You raise your kids, you go on holidays, you even buy property together. But when it all finally ends for good, one of you turns around and says the whole thing was a complete lie. That's the core of this absolutely wild story, and it's a multi-million-dollar question about what the relationship really truly was.
14 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is longer than a lot of marriages. For 14 years after the divorce papers were signed, this couple lived under the same roof, sharing a life and, as it turns out, a mountain of secrets. And it's this huge stretch of time that becomes the main battleground in court.
So here's where the battle lines are drawn. You've got one roof, but two completely different stories. His version? Nope, we were just good friends, companions, co-parenting for the kids. But her version? They were a couple in every single way that mattered, what the law calls de facto partners. Two realities, one house.
So this is the puzzle we're going to piece together. How does a court figure out the truth when the official documents say one thing, but the way they live their lives seems to scream something else entirely? Was this a noble act of co-parenting, or was it a real relationship that was just denied when the money was on the line?
All right, let's start with the man's side of the story. Because you have to admit, on the surface, his case looked rock solid. He walked into court with a pile of official documents that seemed to prove, in black and white, that they were never a couple again.
His whole strategy was basically to build a fortress out of paperwork. He pulls out government welfare forms where she herself, in her own handwriting, declared she was a single parent to get benefits. He had pension forms showing she'd removed him as her beneficiary. Then, he swears under oath they never had a sexual relationship again and, for good measure, says he dated 6 other women during this time. I mean, it's a pretty compelling list of facts. How do you argue with that?
And this quote from his legal statement really sums up his whole argument. He paints this picture of a very practical, almost noble setup. A friendship, all for the good of the children. It's a neat, tidy story, and it seems to have the evidence to back it up. But was it the real story?
Because the woman's case, well, it didn't really rely on forms and documents. Her case relied on something much more human, and maybe much more powerful. The actual picture of the life they shared, painted day by day, over 14 long years.
So her lawyers, they just laid out a timeline that was pretty much impossible to ignore. They say the relationship started up again around 2006. After that, more than 10 trips overseas, and here's the kicker, most of them were just the two of them, no kids. In 2014, they buy an investment property together. I mean, that's a huge financial entanglement. And to the rest of the world, at Christmas, at weddings, at parties, everybody saw them as a couple. This just doesn't sound like just friends.
But the real bombshell, the evidence that just blew the whole case wide open, it came from inside their own family. Their 29-year-old son gets on the stand and completely demolishes his father's story. He testified that his parents shared a bedroom, that he'd walked in on them naked in bed together, and that he even had to knock on the wall one night because, well, their intimate activities were too loud. You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. It was a shocking, personal, and absolutely devastating blow to the father's claim.
And with that testimony, the man's carefully built story it began to crumble. Under the bright lights and the tough questions of the courtroom, the narrative he'd built on paper just couldn't hold up against the weight of real life.
This was the fatal blow to his credibility. In a sworn legal document, he stated that he'd already paid her a $50,000 settlement way back in 2004, which would have ended their financial ties. But in court, when the lawyer says, "Show us the proof," a bank statement, a receipt, anything, he had absolutely nothing. He was forced to admit that he'd lied. Lying about money in a sworn statement, that is a cardinal sin in court.
And from there, the cracks just got bigger. He tried to claim she was violent and unpredictable, but you chose to live with this person for 14 years and travel the world alone with her? It just doesn't add up. Then there were these bank transfers he'd sent her with sexually explicit messages in the description. His explanation? Oh, that was just to annoy her. The judge called that far-fetched. And the final nail in the coffin was a text message his own son revealed. He was totally distraught about her leaving, texting his son, "She's starting a life without me." That is not how a companion talks.
So, with one story completely shredded and the other backed up by the messy reality of their life together, how did the judge make the final call? How does the law even begin to untangle a situation this human, this complicated?
Well, the judge's conclusion was brutal and to the point. He called the husband's entire just companion story a self-serving narrative constructed after the fact. Basically, he said the guy made up a story to try and win in court. The judge just flat out did not believe him.
And the legal reason for this is actually pretty fascinating. It's called the composite picture principle. The court basically says we're not going to be fooled by one little piece of evidence, like a single welfare form. Instead, a judge has to step back and look at the whole painting of the relationship. The money, the social life, how they presented to the world, the emotional connection. And when they did that here, the picture was crystal clear. This was a couple.
Now, this isn't just some bizarre piece of legal trivia. This story is packed with some really powerful lessons that honestly apply to anyone in a long-term relationship. So what can we all take away from this 14-year saga?
All right, here are the big 5. Number 1, actions define your relationship, not words on a form. It's about how you live. Number 2, get financial agreements in writing. Always. If it's not on paper, it's hard to prove. Number 3, for the kids is not a magic legal shield. You can't use your children to hide the reality of your life together. 4, contributions that aren't financial still have real legal value. And finally, maybe the most important lesson of all, in a courtroom, your credibility is everything. One lie can sink your entire ship.
And that kind of leaves us with this big question, right? At the end of the day, what really defines a relationship? Is it the box you check on some government document? Or is it the thousands of days you spend together, the trips you take, the home you build, the life you actually live? The court gave its answer, and it's a huge reminder that the truth of our lives isn't written in ink, it's written in time.